rather not appear. Oh, Suzannah has done it. Thank you, Suzannah. That will save me sitting here worrying about forgetting. So, thank you again for coming. I'm Jackie Bell. I'm the project coordinator for the Curlew LIFE project. And just to give you a bit of a run through of the programme for this evening for what we're going to do. So in a moment, I'll hand over to Suzannah Rockett, who is the Senior Project Manager for Curlew LIFE. She'll give you a quick introduction about the project and how central the role of farmers was in it. And then we'll show you the film, Curlew Custodians. The film's 15 minutes long. And you'll then hear from Ian Cole. Ian is one of our project officers for Curlew LIFE. He's been working at the Hadrian's Wall area in Northern England, and Ian will tell you about the work that he's done with some of the farmers there, and that'll bring to life some of the advice that you'll have seen in the film. And then we'll have a little interview with one of the farmers from Ian's landscape. And after that, you'll hear just a little update from some of the people in the RSPB who work on farming policy and farming advisory. And they'll just give you an update on what's happening with the agri-environment schemes in each of the 4 countries. And then it's over to you really for question time. So I'll just hand over to Suzannah.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. Can you just let me know when you can see the slides?
Yep, we can see them now.
Wonderful. Okay, thanks so much, Jackie, and good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. As Jackie said, my name is Suzannah Rockett, and I'm the Senior Project Manager for what's been the Curlew LIFE project. So I just wanted to give a quick overview and probably kind of tell you all things that you already know about Curlew, but the reason why this kind of project happened and started in 2020 was because of the long-term trend of curlew decline, and quite rapid decline since the mid-1990s across the UK. Kind of as we can kind of see from this graph, the decline is around kind of 48% since the mid-1990s, and that's much more severe in Wales and in Northern Ireland, and that kind of risks us in the UK losing the breeding bird within a generation in those landscapes. So this has been attributed to low breeding success as a key reason for the decline, and is for reasons that we're very familiar with for many species, due to loss of habitat, especially through things like draining of land, planting of plantations, and the intensification of farming, particularly around the switch from hay to silage, changes in stocking levels. So all those things that kind of we geared the country towards in terms of increase of food production, intensification of farming from the kind of mid-20th century onwards. And this has also kind of seen high levels of predation, particularly amongst generalist predators like foxes and crows, which kind of correlates with the kind of numbers have increased, and that's correlated with these kind of wider habitat shifts that we've seen in the countryside. So that's kind of the background to why this project kind of got off the ground. What the Curlew LIFE project was. It's been a 4-year project sponsored primarily by the EU Life Nature Fund, with support from Natural Resources Wales, DARE in Northern Ireland, and some other agencies, but delivered by the RSPB. And that kind of map shows you where we've been focusing on. So these have been the landscapes we've been working on. So there's been 5 project sites. The focus has been about increasing the breeding success of curlew, and we've kind of covered sites in all 4 UK countries. Now, we have worked on a couple of reserve sites, but the predominant focus of this project has been on farmland. As we probably well know, this is a farmland bird. It isn't a species that can be saved by just focusing on nature reserves. It needs landscape scale intervention and needs kind of cross-working with farmers, land managers, government agencies, and conservationists. So in terms of the landscapes we worked on, we predominantly worked in upland landscapes, so in the Antrim Plateau, Hadrian's Wall, which Ian will touch on, and Ysbyddiaeth and Gareth in North Wales, all kind of upland habitats, some peatland, dry heath, some semi-improved landscape, moorland fringe, and predominantly sheep farming in those areas as well. We did work in some lowland wet grassland in the upper Locher, and again, predominantly sheep farming. And over the course of the project, we worked with more than 280 farms. So a lot of the work that happened on these landscapes over the past 4 years has only been possible with the real support and the dedication of the farmers. They've been absolutely key to the success of the project, and Ian will speak to some of the work that's happened on Hadrian's Wall, on the Hadrian's Wall landscape after this film. So in terms of this film is about kind of the project's legacy and a hope to encourage other farmers to be able to support kind of curlew on their land. So it was created as part of Curlew Life, but it's going to be a publicly available film, and specifically aimed at farmers and landowners to give advice in terms of what they can do to support curlew on their land and where else they can go for advice if required. There's been a phenomenal effort, both in terms of the making of this film and also in terms of the collaboration and close working relationship we've had with the farmers over the course of this project. So without further ado, I will hand you back to Jackie to show the film Curlew Custodians. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Suzannah. Yeah, so we're going to do this two ways. We'll give you two options. So I'm just conscious that sometimes internet connectivity can be a bit laggy. And so it might give you a better experience to watch the film directly on YouTube. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in the chat, put the link in the chat, but I'm also going to play the film from my screen. So like hopefully one or the other will work for you. So I'm just going to put the link in the chat there. So there is the link. So if anything goes awry or it's quite laggy, please do just jump onto YouTube and watch it, and then we'll all come back together again. So I'll just share my screen. Okay, I hope you enjoy it.
When the curlew return in the spring, it's like, you know, spring's arrived. It's a fabulous thing.
We've had curlew here twice. I thought that was brilliant. They were one of the most popular birds in Ireland before my time, and I'd never heard them. The sound of it's fascinating.
That's the one.
The curlew is Europe's largest wading bird, famous for its bubbling call. However, the Eurasian curlew is on the red list as near threatened globally. The picture is even worse at a European level, where they're listed as threatened. The UK hosts around a quarter of the world's breeding curlews, so this is a hugely important place for them. But they are in steep decline here. Since the mid-1990s, we've lost nearly half, 48%, of our breeding curlews. They will be lost altogether unless there is urgent action. The main reason for their decline is that not enough chicks are surviving through to fledgling. This is due to changes over the years on their breeding grounds, such as suitable habitat being lost or becoming more fragmented, along with pressures from predation and development. Curlews come inland to breed in the spring. They rely largely on farmland, mainly in the uplands, but also in lowland areas. Farmers have a key role to play in helping to reverse the decline of curlews by giving them the kind of habitat they need to nest and raise their chicks. In this film, we'll look at some of the most important things that farmers can do to help curlews, with a particular focus on upland farms and marginal farmed land. When it comes to helping curlews to breed successfully on your land, the most important things you can do are managing vegetation with curlews in mind, having wet areas, disturbing the curlews as little as possible, making your farm less attractive to predators. How you go about this will vary depending on the kind of landscape you're farming in. Curlews tend to choose boggy, rushy areas to breed in. Managing rush is key. That'll generally be a combination of topping and grazing, which can be challenging in very wet areas. Topping rushes. Curlews require a tussocky but open structure to the vegetation that offers enough height and complexity to conceal a nest, but also the openness to allow movement. The aim of rush cutting for curlews is to prevent rush from becoming too dense, but not removing it altogether. As a general rule, if half or more of a field is covered in rush, cutting may be beneficial to maintain an open structure.
So when managing rush for breeding waders, the key thing that we're trying to do really is to create a varied sward structure. In areas of dense soft rush, what we would generally do is just cut all of that rush. In areas where the rush is less dense, or if you've got different species of rush, then we can cut a bit more selectively. By creating this varied sward structure, that enables the curlew to have places to nest and to hide their chicks from predators, and also having the more open areas for feeding.
For rush topping in really wet areas, it might be necessary to use a tracked vehicle, like a tractor with a Susi track system. Thanks to funding through the Curlew LIFE project, the RSPB was able to help with this on some farms.
So in the past, I've had contractors come in and get the rush, but they're only getting so far. They're not getting down, we're on the fen land at the bottom, where you're not really on terra firma. Whereas RSPB's tractor was here 2 years ago and they basically covered it all. They did a great job. So getting the RSPB out to get the rush cut this time of the year, it's benefiting me in the farm and it's benefiting the waders.
Pan mae brwyn yn mynd yn bach yn rhy dew, fel bod y gylfingir a'r anifeiliaid yn methu mynd trwyddo fo, mae'n job dda dorio, os di bosib. Mae'n bwysig gadael ynysodd o frwyn yma acw. Fyddwn ni yn defnyddio brwyn weithiau fel reid o dan yr anifeiliaid sy'n cael ei cadw dan do yn y gaea. Ond mae'n stwff da, mae'n ddim i ddechrau. Diolch yn tueddu o sticio yn y glân, mor ddrwg na gwell. Dwi'n defnyddio yn yr rhac yn heddiw i reid defed fewn i gael cnifio.
Grazing. Grazing with cattle is particularly good for creating the kind of mixed sward that curlews need. Grazing at the appropriate density is key, along with the type and breed of livestock, with hardier breeds of cattle tending to be better for this type of grazing.
We use a farm primarily for these cattle here, which are red poll. They're very good regenerative cattle, so that they'll eat certain grasses that other cattle won't, or sheep won't especially. Their footprints will leave little divots and holes, either to encourage insects and worms and things to come through. Their dung will produce other insects that are interested in feeding on dung, which again provides another meal for the curlew. We're trying to create spaces between especially rushes, so young chick curlew can wander around safely. When the cattle move off one field, we'll give them the field at least 2 or 3 weeks break, and then sheep will come on in small numbers. The same 10-acre field that had 3 cattle on it would then probably have 6 to 10 sheep on it. Make sure that it's never intensive, so there's enough clear areas and that nesting won't be disturbed by numbers basically.
Keeping disturbance to a minimum. Curlews are vulnerable to disturbance from farm operations when they are nesting and when they have young chicks.
We cut silage for the cows in the winter. We cut the fields late, after the 28th of July, which is when the curlew have all left by then. A lot of farms wouldn't need to adjust such a lot to make the habitat a lot better for curlew. A little bit of late silaging, a little bit of thought, or even look where the nests are and go around them. Some people do that and it's quite successful. You know, a lot of silage is taken really early and then people have to add straw to it to make it not as good. Could just take it a little bit later and give the curlews a chance. We don't do anything with anything from the second that the curlew come back, so we'll never travel on any of the ground, even where they are, if we can help it. And if we can remove stock from where they are, then we'll try and do that as well. The curlew on our own farm, since we've been working with the RSPB, have increased, so it's good.
Managing scrub. It's not recommended to remove trees and scrub without seeking advice. They can be very valuable for other wildlife and may be an important feature of a landscape.
Scrub removal is going to help grounding nesting birds like lapwing and curlew because they want to be able to see around them, particularly for foxes and other predators. They want to be able to see and ward off what's coming. They're not stupid. They know that a crow will sit in a tree and wait for them to get off their nest.
Creating wet areas. In general, restoring the natural hydrology on the land and re-wetting areas where curlews breed is very helpful for them. For example, where the land's been drained in the past. In some places, scrapes could be created, but this should be looked at in the context of the wider hydrology.
Mae'r gylfeinir a nifer adar eraill yn bwydo trwy gollwng a gwthio'i ffug hir I mewn i'r pridd i fita pryfed genwair a gwahanol bethau. Felly, drwy gael y mawndir a'r tir yn lypach ac yn mwy meddal, mae'n haws iddi bwydo. A mae hyn yn arbennig o bwysig pe mae efo'i chiwion yn yr ucheldir. Mae'r ciwion yn deor ar ôl i gori nhw'n 4 wythnos. Maen nhw'n dod allan o'r wyau a maen nhw wrthi wedyn yn bwydo'u hunain yn y glaswelltir a'r mawndir o'i cwmpas nhw. Mae'r ciwion yn fach iawn a mae pig nhw hefyd yn fach. Felly, yn yr wythnosau cyntaf, maen nhw angen bita pryfetach sydd ar wyneb y tir. Ond wrth i'w pig nhw hefyd dyfu'n hirach, maen nhw'n gallu bwydo i lawr yn y pridd.
Re-wetting.
Ger y ffarm hon, maen nhw wedi bod yn gwella'r cynefin trwy ail-lychu y mawndir a cau y ffosydd cafodd ei gosod yn y mawndir rhai blynyddoedd yn ôl i'w sychio. Y bwriad ydy, drwy gymryd talpiau fawn i roi nhw yn y ffosydd a'i cryfhau nhw, mae'n creu system o argau bychain sydd yn arafu llif y dŵr ac yn creu pyllau bach. A mae hynny'n gwneud 2 beth. Mae'n golygu fod y tir yn lypach am fwy o'r flwyddyn. Mae'r gwaith i ail-lychu y mawn yn arbennig o bwysig yn ystod y tymor nythu. Wrth wella ansawdd y tir, fod o'n haws yn ei fwydo a bod yna fwy o brofetach. Pan mae'r ciwion yn fach, mae'r iar a ceiliod yn ei gwachod nhw wrth gwrs. Ac os does yna ddim ddigon o fwyd mewn un lle, mae'r rhieni wedyn yn ei harwain nhw i ardaloedd newydd i fwydo. Os dyn ni'n gallu gwella'r cynefin mewn ardal, mae'n golygu dydyn nhw ddim wedyn yn gorfod teithio mor bell, a mae'n llai o beryg wedyn iddyn nhw gael eu bwyta gen llwyogod, brain ac anifeiliaid eraill. Mae'r ffaith bod y mawn wedi ail-lychu'n golygu fod o'n dal y dŵr yn ôl yn hirach sydd o fydd i'r tir ei hun, i'r stoc, a hefyd i unrhyw greaduriaid eraill sy'n byw yna.
Digging scrapes. Digging scrapes is another way to provide wet areas for curlews. These are pools that may gradually dry up over the summer, continuously providing muddy areas full of invertebrates for curlews to feed on. Make sure your scrape isn't the same depth across all of it. Have humps and hollows to create niches for plants and animals. The deepest area should be around 50 centimetres. Have a low gradient slope at the sides so the birds can reach the water's edge easily. It's important to manage the vegetation around the edges of the scrape. Grazing can help to keep the edges open and muddy, stopping vegetation from taking over. This reduces the need for ongoing management by machinery. Alternatively, you may need to mow or clear out with a digger each year. Predation management. If you are considering how to manage and reduce predation on your farm, the most important initial consideration is making sure that the habitat is as good as it can be for breeding curlew. Predator management is likely to be much more effective if it is done alongside measures to provide suitable breeding habitat, as featured in this film. It should not be undertaken without these crucial interventions. Getting the habitat right may also reduce predation risk. For example, managing vegetation will help curlew chicks to stay hidden from predators, whilst providing wet areas means they won't have to travel as far to find food, which can expose them to predators. Targeted scrub removal can reduce vantage points and places for predators to hide. There are also steps you can take to make your farm less attractive to predators. One way is to limit the amount of food available to predators. For example, using enclosed feeders for livestock to reduce the number of corvids and removing afterbirth and dead livestock as quickly as possible. You can also make it more difficult for ground predators to move around the farm. They will often follow linear features, such as fences, tracks and walls, so try to keep these to a minimum. A number of curlew recovery projects around the UK have used temporary nest fencing to minimise the risk of nests and eggs being predated by mammals. In some areas, this has been highly effective in increasing hatching rates, alongside habitat management. However, because nest fencing disturbs birds during nesting, it is important to seek advice and follow best practice before implementing it. If you are considering predator control, this should be informed, targeted, and done at an appropriate scale and intensity. It should also be in line with legal regulations and should follow best practice in welfare standards. Where undertaken, control of foxes and crows should be in combination with measures to reduce the underlying drivers of high predation pressure, or at the very least, not contribute to those drivers. It is also important, where possible, to monitor the effectiveness of any management you undertake to support curlew breeding on your farm. Maintaining good soil. Applying farmyard manure, liming and maintaining good soil structure can boost worms and other soil life on farmland, providing food for curlew. Earthworms are sensitive to soil acidity. Around pH 5.5 is ideal for them. Consult with your local agriculture and environment authorities in case permission is needed for actions like liming. The bird's eye view. When it comes to turning around the curlew's fortunes, farmers have a critical role to play. Having effective, adequately funded agri-environment schemes that are well supported by advice in each of the 4 countries of the UK is essential to this. Of course, farming is one part of a much bigger picture, albeit a very important part. UK governments need to safeguard key breeding and wintering grounds by designating them as a network of protected areas for curlews, known as Special Protection Areas or SPAs. Future woodland planting and other types of development must be done sensitively to prevent curlew habitat from becoming more fragmented. And the restoration of peatlands can help curlews and the climate crisis. It's going to take a collective effort from governments, organisations and people, focusing on everything from policy and habitat management to science and public engagement. But together, there's still time to save curlew. Getting support. There are a range of organisations working on the recovery of curlews and other species who may be able to offer advice and support depending on your location. For example, the RSPB, the Nature Friendly Farming Network and local wildlife trusts, to name a few.
Mae'n bosib bod 'na arian ar gael unai trwy cynlluniau amaethyddol neu amgylcheddol I chi wneud gwaith tebyg I hyn eich hunain. Mae'n werth I chi sôn wrth eich adran amaethyddol chi yn eich gwlad chi.
We are optimistic that with the right support for farmers and other landowners to put in place the measures that will help curlew to thrive, we can see a recovery in the population.
Visit the Curlew LIFE website for more information.
Well, there you have it. That was our film. So I will put the link again in the chat just in case anyone who joined us afterwards would like to watch it later and can't see that part of the chat. But yeah, just very grateful to all the farmers and all the people across the RSPB who supported the film, and of course to our filmmaker Mikey Snedden, and to Luke Bleszczowski, who got us started on the project with the initial filmmaking. And thank you to Ian Riding and his band who allowed us to use their music in the film as well. So I'd just like to hand over to Ian Cole. So as I mentioned, Ian is the project officer at Hadrian's Wall, and also the RSPB Geltsdale Nature Reserve. Ian had the biggest area in the project. He worked with 25 farms, but had the smallest team, which was just him. That went for his predecessor before him, Tina Taylor as well. But he was able to deliver a formidable amount of habitat works in his time there. That was largely thanks to the really strong relationships that he built up with the farmers there. Ian also had a team of about 30 volunteers helping with the monitoring, and on top of all that, he carried out a very extensive program of communications and engagements as well. So yeah, just hand over to Ian then to talk about how he has worked with farmers at Hadrian's Wall. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Jackie. Okay, so yeah, my name's Ian, and like Jackie said, I've been the project officer on Hadrian's Wall. So I've got a little presentation just to summarise the work that we've done with farmers and how I see the relationship between farmers and conservationists has been pivotal to the success in recovery curlew populations. Just bear with me 1 second and we will get that on. Is it sharing yet? Can you guys see that presentation now?
Yes, we can do.
Sweet. Okay. So
if you hit present in Teams, it'll fill the screen.
That's okay. I've got two screens open, so it's all right.
Okay.
So yeah. So basically, what I'm going to look at today, or tonight, sorry, is what the farmers allowed us to do along Hadrian's Wall, and how we targeted the intervention work that we did, and basically the results of that. So farmers helped us identify areas in the landscape that were curlew hotspots, where there were generally pairs using every year, and also areas on farms that were maybe we were able to do some intervention work, such as creating scrapes, topping of rushes, removal of conifer plantation. For anybody who doesn't know what a scrape is, basically it is what it says on the tin. You put a bulldozer in the land, pull the top layer of the soil away, and water will flow. Well, you choose where you put them so that they're in drainage ditches that are not being used anymore, and basically the scrapes will fill with water, and that allows invertebrate life somewhere to thrive. And also, if the weather is dry, there will always be an area where curlew can forage and where chicks can forage. Excuse me. So on Hadrian's Wall, our farmers allowed us to top over 20 hectares of rushes, and we created 20 new scrapes in that landscape, and that really is quite pivotal. So a lot of farmers allowed us to put scrapes into landscape on their farms, but didn't necessarily get birds nesting back on their farms. But what we came to realize and share with them was that just because the birds weren't nesting there didn't mean that the scrapes weren't important. Having scrapes on an adjacent plot, the curlew don't recognise obviously the farm boundaries, so as long as there's somewhere in an area where they can go to forage or bathe even, then those scrapes are still very important in that landscape. We also have we've re-wetted some drained land on a farm. We installed some leaky dams alongside the Tyne Rivers Trust, and helped re-wet quite a large area of bogland, which was in a very highly curlew populated area. Where we identified curlew nests, farmers there generally were aware that the birds were there anyway, but it also meant that we could help them decide when was the best time to cut hay. If there were birds not nesting in that land and the weather was favourable, then maybe it was okay for them. But if there were birds nesting, then the farmers generally always allowed us or advised them to make a slightly later hay cut. Excuse me. It's not changing my slide. There we go. Okay, so this is an example of some of the farms in which we've put scrapes. On the slide at the top, the scrape there actually goes all the way to the horizon. It's enormous. It's over 350 meters long, and it has a series of pools alongside it, so that if the wetland was to dry out in periods of sort of dry spring like we had last year in 2023, there would be these pools left behind that would still allow birds opportunities to forage. And what that means is that if they're nesting nearby and there is an opportunity to feed or bathe nearby, then the birds aren't leaving the chicks or the eggs unguarded as long, and so you get a higher success rate from those nests because the adults are able to be more predator minded. The scrape at the bottom is, again, that one's along an old ditch on the right, and that's going to be wet pretty much year round, so it was a very important area to put the scrapes in. And in the scrape on the left, the one with the sunset in the picture, that scrape's actually 400 meters long. It goes behind where I took the photograph from. And why I include this photograph is that the digger driver was a birder. And at the start of the day, he wasn't convinced as to how successful putting scrapes into the landscape was going to be, because he'd never done anything like that in the course of his work before. This photograph was taken at the end of the day when we had put in that series of scrapes, and we actually had a pair of curlew on the first scrape that he dug that day, and he was over the moon. And it's one of those things that he would then go on to other farms and tell them about that story, and then that opens opportunities on other farms. And we were getting people coming to us asking if they were able to join the project because the word was getting out that we were doing good things for curlew in the area, and everybody wanted to be part of it. And it built this whole community around the birds. Pit farmers would send me WhatsApp messages of nests that they've found, or they would be talking to each other at local events and see who had the most curlews, whose chicks were furthest on. And it really built relationships between myself, the farmers, and the local community and the volunteers, to the point where opportunities were opened up to us that maybe wouldn't have been at the beginning of the project. It took time for farmers to get to know me and for me to get to know them, but the relationships that we cultivated really worked out so productive for the birds and also for the farmers as well, in terms of we would be able to help them get work done that they maybe didn't have the funding for or even the time to do. So we were able to identify opportunities with other organisations such as Natural England, where if work was being done on one farm, could we do work on other farms in an area so that we were not paying as much for moving costs of machinery. And again, that brought local groups of farms together because they were all aware that they were doing things for the birds in their landscape. And I became very, very proud to be known as the curlew guy. So everybody who saw me driving along would wave. I absolutely loved being part of that community. So as Jackie said earlier, we've worked with 25 farms this year, 27 farms overall. And over the life of the project, we've had 50 volunteers, which is a phenomenal amount of people giving up their time to help look after these birds. Excuse me. There we go, it changed. Other things that we've done, one farm in particular was having a problem with bird strikes on overhead power lines. We lost a couple of curlew over the life of the project, and also black grouse on that farm. Because of the sighting of the power lines and the shape of the farmland, it was kind of a crucible, if you like. Whichever direction birds flew into the landscape, they couldn't see the power lines over the horizon. And just through a chance conversation with a friend who happened to work for Northern Power Grid, I was able to find someone that helped me get these bird diverters installed on the power lines for free. And it was a really successful adventure, if you like. The farmers didn't get any more strikes along that stretch of line. And the neighbouring farms who also had a similar problem, they've also started to pursue getting these discs installed on the power lines. And that one ran in quite a few press releases and generated a lot of positive feedback for the project, or a lot of positive news for the project, if you like. We also looked at things called no fence collars. So for the farmers in the audience, you may know what no fence collars are, but some of the people may not, so I'll explain. Basically, no fence collars are collars that you hang around the necks of cattle in this instance, but you can also get smaller ones for sheep, which we've used at Geltsdale. And basically, these are linked to an app on a mobile phone where you can draw a polygon just randomly with your finger almost. And that creates an invisible fence so that the cattle are focused grazing, if you like. So you can target areas that were rushy, or if you wanted to scrape that need to be kept open or churned up a little bit, you could draw polygons around those areas and the cattle will stay inside of them. And the way that works is that as the cattle approach the boundary that you've drawn, they'll get an audible beep. And as they get closer and closer to that boundary, the beat will get louder and more persistent until eventually, if they crossed the threshold, they'd get a small electric shock, which would move them back inside that perimeter. And it doesn't take long before they learn that as soon as they hear that alarm, don't go any further in that direction. And you could move these cattle around every day if you wanted to, if you were doing mob grazing, for example. And it can prove to be a very effective tool. It did on the Geltsdale Reserve, where we're using 150 of them, I think, on sheep, and we've got probably 50 on cattle. And Kit's going to talk a little bit about his experience with them later when we're chatting to him. Another thing that we did, there we go. Sorry, there's a little bit of a lag, is where we were identified pairs that were nesting. If we could locate a nest, then we worked with the farmers to put electric fences around these nests with their permission. Basically, these nest fences were 25 meters square, and we had a very strict set of conditions that we followed when we installed them. So we had a 30-minute window to get from the bird flushing to us getting out of the area and waiting for the bird to return. If the birds didn't return, then we would take the fences down. That never happened. On the right is my crack team of nest fence assemblers. I think each of us has been shocked at least once in our haste to get the fences up. But these guys basically were like a lifeboat crew. When a nest was identified, if a farmer rang me, then we would scramble, if you like, and get the kit up as quickly as we could. And where it is most effective is in keeping badgers away from eggs. In Hadrian's Wall area, we do have a very big badger population, and these are very effective deterrent for mammals. But we noticed this year we didn't have, well, last year as well, we never had any avian predation of eggs that were inside fences either, which I find quite interesting. I know obviously a bird could fly over the fence, but for whatever reason, the crows seem to be quite wary. And to give you an example of how effective they can be, the first nest this season was found on the 10th of April. A farmer rang me at 8 o'clock in the morning to say that he'd found a nest with 4 eggs. And I got there at 9:30 and it had already been predated by crows at that point. So in 90 minutes, the birds had obviously identified where it was. And yeah, we lost that clutch. But that pair did relay and we managed to fence the nest off in that instance. And they successfully hatched. So it proves what a timely intervention can do, and also how effective in terms of getting eggs to hatching nest fences can be. In terms of my own integration into the community, I think this is where the project has had its biggest successes, and I know Northern Ireland and Wales would say the same thing. We've built relationships with the farmers by attending events, by using local businesses, becoming familiar to people, if you like. Like I said, I'm known as the Curlew guy along the wall. My dog was a great tool in this because he just wants to be friends with everybody else's dogs. So it proved to be good conversation starters. And where we were attending events, invariably we had people coming up to us asking how the birds were doing in the area. Farmers that weren't in the project were asking if they could become part of it. Volunteers, quite a lot of volunteers were signed up at events because they just had heard about the project through other people, and it could go on forever, that kind of relationship. And I think it's the key to success is farmers and conservationists working together brings better results for everybody. And mainly, I think what a conservationist and volunteers can do, because obviously the farmers have allowed volunteers to survey their land and wander around it freely, and also built relationships with them, is by people like myself showing empathy to the plight of the farmers. It's not an easy life. I fully accept that. Some of my family history is in farming, and by being empathetic to weather conditions and restrictions and the payment schemes, maybe it's not providing as much incentive for wildlife friendly farming as it might. I think you're showing people that you're not telling them what to do. You're trying. What I've always tried to do is identify things that I can do in partnership with farmers so that we get the best results for the curlew, but also for the farmer. And hopefully that has been successful. In terms of building relationships, another very useful tool was in helping farmers see what they've actually got on their land. We've had some quite rare sedges identified on surveys because one of the volunteers was a botanist. I'm not myself particularly, but the farmer was over the moon that we identified those on her farm, and she couldn't tell enough people about it. And I think that's brilliant. It builds a relationship even with the farmer and their land. And I also established a network of trail cameras across the scrapes and nests that we put up. So I'm going to show you a few different clips that will highlight the joy that a farmer can get by seeing what's on their land by these intimate little views that they wouldn't normally get to see. And hopefully this will play. Come on, you know you want to. Here we go. I have thousands of these clips, so I have just picked a couple. But you would never get these lovely intimate views if you were. I've been birding for 40 years and I've never been this close to a curlew while it was having a bath. And it also allowed us to identify birds that had leg rings on. Again, you would need a super scope to be able to see details like that, but by having a camera in the landscape, you can find out that information. I'm going to move on to the next one. So it's not all about the curlews. There are lots of other wild creatures using these landscapes, and I love this clip. I just think they're just having an absolute game of it. And also you can identify birds that may have been breeding or using the landscape that you just didn't know were there, such as these black grouse. Not looking in the best of condition, that one, obviously molt, but using the scrape that we had put in, and that's a very unexpected bonus. And we did identify a couple of black grouse using that land, which is obviously great for the farmer to know that they're around. Disappears into the landscape there. So as well as us sharing that information with farmers, I've also learned quite a lot from my farmers. They've always been very open to sharing information with me. One farmer, I had 3 nests fenced off near this photograph of the foxes, and the foxes denned right outside of one of them. Maybe it's 20 meters from the nest, or from the fence edge, sorry. And the farmer advised me to leave the foxes alone because he said that the vixen would probably travel further away to make kills and then bring stuff back to the den, and probably wouldn't touch the birds that were nesting in the field or the 2 fields next door, and it proved to be the case. So we actually ended up with 2 broods of chicks using this field while the foxes were in it, and both, well, one brood definitely fledged at least 2 chicks. The other one I wasn't really sure of because they moved around in the landscape when the weather changed. So yeah, I'm really grateful to the guys who shared their knowledge for that. Sorry, I skipped a slide there. And I think it's very important to celebrate successes. I know all of these guys are really modest. They think they're just doing their job, but without them being open to working with people like myself and Jackie and all the other project guys or curlew projects around the country, things wouldn't get done. And so I think it's important that you give these guys the plaudits that they deserve. So Ian, who featured in our movie on the right hand, he's on the right hand side there. Him and his partner Rebecca, they won the Curlew Farmland Award last year. And Kit, who we're going to hear from later, he won a Curlew Friendly Farming Award this year. And that's a brood that was on Kit's land. Kit is excellent at finding curlew nests. He found that nest with the chicks in. He found that before there was even a single egg in it. So I am very grateful for his help. And celebrating success, well, that kind of, it's a very vague term. So what does it mean? Well, if you were to sum it up in a nutshell, it would be this. So all of that work by volunteers and the farmers and fence erection and surveys and the mileage done, and really this 5-second clip summarizes all of that work, and that's what makes everybody proud of being part of the project. And then once the chicks have left the nest, they become very difficult to find. So I tried to make the most of those opportunities. There's a little bit of background noise on this one with the wind, so if you just bear with me, it's not too long a clip if it decides it wants to play. Oh. So this chick was just over a week old, and there were actually 3 chicks in the landscape when I was filming this, and then there was also a brood of younger ones in the same field.
Sorry, and just to give you a 1-minute warning, if
Oh, right. Okay, I've only got one slide left, Jackie. Sorry. Never had that before. So this is a quick summary slide of the farms in the landscape on Hadrian's Wall that we've worked with. All the farms in green here, they're all part of the Curlew Life project, and the coloured dots represent curlew nest or curlew pairs that were found over the 4 years of the project. As you can see, there are hotspots and there are some not so hotspots, but the not so hotspots are still important in the landscape. A lot of farms where there were not hotspots did get large flocks of post-breeding or non-breeding curlews using the landscape, sometimes after they'd made cuts and the birds were moving in to recoup the energy before they migrated to their wintering sites. And yeah, basically, connectivity of those farms, sharing information was important. As I've already discussed, being involved, taking advice as well as giving it, being empathetic, and also I think the key thing for success of nature-friendly farming is schemes that reward nature-friendly farming, because the farmers basically are doing a job for us to feed us, but we need to make sure that they can still make a living at that. And I am very grateful to all of the guys who helped me. And thank you very much. Hopefully there should be one last. No, it's not going to say anything. There he is. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you very much. So we're now going to hear from Kit Acton, who you saw in the slides there. Kit, if you're with us, if you wouldn't mind just unveiling yourself.
Like a seance.
I am here.
Are you there, Kit?
I am here, yeah.
Great. Okay.
You're on my screen anyway.
Yeah, so Kit, you'll see him whenever he switches his camera on. You'll probably recognize him from the photo you just saw on the quad bike. But Kit is going to tell us a bit more about what it was like taking part in Curlew Life and carrying out some of the kinds of works that you saw just now. So, Kit, maybe we start just by tell us a bit about your farm. You know, where it is, the type of land you've got, and what kind of farming you do.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. I hope everyone can see me. Kit's on page 5 currently.
Yep, I can see you now. You're on page 1 now for me anyway.
So I farm on Hadrian's Wall, which is just on the southern edge of Northumberland National Park. It's 1,000 acres of sort of, poor, rough grazing really, running from 800 to 1,300 feet. We're National Trust tenants, and farming partnership with parents. We've got about 1,000 hill ewes and 60 or so suckler cows. So that gives you an idea of where the farm is and what we're doing.
Okay, thank you. And so how did you let us get you dragged into this curlew project, Kit? What was it about? Why did you want to help the curlews?
I think everyone likes. I don't know any farmers that don't like the wildlife on the farm. And yeah, there's been curlews along Hadrian's Wall for as long as I've been here. Obviously, they're the symbol of Northumberland National Park as well. But I think the numbers are steadily declining. We certainly get told the numbers are declining. And when the RSPB turned up with the Curlew Life funding and said that they had a plan to actually get boots on the ground and see what's happening, I think it's an interesting chance. And ultimately, from our point of view, we made space or gave permission for everyone, for Ian and his volunteers and Tina before Ian, to get out onto farm and do the survey work and things, but it wasn't too onerous from our point of view. So happy to be involved, really.
Yeah. And so can you tell us a bit about some of the works that happened on your farm through Curlew Life then? What did Ian do to your place, Kit?
Sure. Well, I mean, the biggest bit of work from Ian's point of view is organising volunteers primarily to do habitat surveys and predator surveys. And then once territories have been identified, keeping tabs on whether those birds are nesting and how successful they're being. In terms of capital works, we did a little bit of scrape creation, which from our point of view, it was actually quite a large broken drain in some rough grazing that's sort of been on the list to fix, but never really been financially viable to go and repair. So rather than draining it again properly, we've let the RSPB stick some scrapes in. Yeah. What else did you get up to, Ian? Nest fencing, I suppose, is the other main occupation that Ian and his team were up to.
Yeah, but also because we had that dry spell last spring, we looked at the possibility of maybe re-wetting the head of the scrape this spring, if that was the case, because it would help the birds. Unfortunately, that didn't happen because it was so wet, but you were very open to that help.
Yeah.
Grand. So quite a bit of stuff going on there then. And we saw in the film with the grazing, particularly with the cattle playing an important part in creating a good habitat for curlews or being part of the mix, and about the no fence collars. And you had done a trial of those collars in your farm, hadn't you? So if you want to maybe tell us a bit about, I gather it wasn't 100% successful, but if you wanted to tell us a bit about what you were trying to achieve with that maybe, and like how it went.
Sure. So the block of ground that we created the scrapes on, and that for our farm is one of the most popular bits for curlews, is sort of 150 acres or so on a hillside. But the only water supply historically was the stream in the bottom. So through spring, summer, particularly in the summer, the cattle that are grazing on there only really hung around in the sort of bottom of the, it's not a valley, but at the bottom of the hill, meaning that, yeah, we got excessive rush and grass growth on the top of the hill and up sort of the furthest points from the stream, and the cattle hanging down by the stream there. So the concept with the collars was twofold. One was from the curlew's point of view to try and keep them away from nests in the spring, and the other was to try and break up that grazing pattern a bit. We had a water system that we added in as well, so we could get water further away from the stream, and try and shift the grazing about a bit. And how did it go? The concept was good, and the collars worked really well when they were working. We found, certainly with the batch of collars that we had quite a few failures, collars that would, whether the batteries would die too quickly or would just drop out of service. And when you've got 30 cows and you're trying to keep them all in one place with audio cues, it's all right when 30 of them are being told they've got to stay there. But once 3 or 4 of them can drift off, the others start thinking, well, I'm just going to go as well. So it became fairly laborious getting them in to sort collars out that had stopped working, which is why ultimately we gave them up after the first year. That was our experience of no fence collars. But I would say that there's, you speak to a few other people that have had better success with them. So whether we had a poor area for them or a poor batch of collars, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Yeah, because as was mentioned, like they use them at RSPB Geltdale, and but yeah, definitely an option, especially if you want to move cattle around and you're not in a position to be putting in physical fences everywhere, obviously, in farms like yours. So in terms of the funding to carry out works that would help Curlew, so what funding can you currently get to carry out the kinds of things that we saw in the film, which would help curlews, maybe just for especially people in the audience who aren't familiar with farming payments? So how has that side of it been working?
Sure. Well, so it's different in all of the devolved regions would be the first point. But in England, historically, funding's been through countryside stewardship. We have quite a bit of ground that's in an option. It's called UP2, management of rust grazing for ground nesting birds. And historically, that's been the sort of best route to get sort of revenue funding for reduced stocking rates and getting that sort of mixed height sward that ground nesting birds are after. Bit of a funny time to be in, well, to be in agriculture at all, certainly in England at the moment. In that we're in no man's land at the moment. The new countryside stewardship scheme options haven't been released, and you can't apply for the old ones. So we don't know exactly what's next at the moment. It's the honest answer.
That's
yeah,
difficult time, Kit, then, for in terms of trying to plan for what actions you can maybe take on the farm. Well, I mean, would you have any advice for farmers who might be thinking of taking up any of the options that might help curlews on their land, the kinds of things that we saw in the film, or anything you think that might be useful for farmers?
I don't know what the best advice there is, really. I suppose just the best thing for curlews on our farm, I think, having had Rhian and his team out, is there's been people there to give you confidence in what you think was happening is happening, about where curlew are nesting and where the territories are and what they're up to. But I suppose pay attention to them is the sort of easiest thing to do, in a way, because it is quite clear. I'm sure most people will have seen this already who have got curlews on the ground, but it is quite clear when they're telling you, particularly when they've got chicks, to stay away from a certain area. And probably the first thing that farmers could do is just to, like Rhian was saying, maybe temper when you're taking your hay cuts and things a bit if it's obvious that there's curlew in that field. And the chicks, I mean, they'll even move out of the field if you give them the option to when you're in the area, if you know what I mean. So that's probably the easiest thing to do as a starter for 10. After that, I think relying on, well, using the countryside stewardship schemes to probably get payments on bits of ground that aren't as productive for agriculture, which will probably push you to have slightly less stock on there than you would like, but you do get this compensatory payment, which maybe makes slightly more space for some of the wildlife on the farm.
Excellent. Oh, Kit, thank you so much. That's been really helpful. And Kit will still be with us for a bit if you want to ask him questions after. But Kit, thank you. We'll just, that leads on quite well to our section about the agri-environment schemes. And we've got representatives from each of the countries who's going to just give us a wee brief update about where we're at as far as the development of the new schemes. And I'll start with the England one. Unfortunately, our colleague wasn't able to join us, but he has made a little video for us. So I will just load that up and then let's get that. Bear with me a second. I've just, wouldn't you know, I just can't find it now. Well, sorry, I'll have a look for us here. But maybe we'll go to Gareth first, while I busy myself trying to find the England recording. Sorry about that. Is that all right, Gareth, if we go to you?
That's great. Thanks very much, Jackie. And make sure you've got your sheep's crook. So if I'm still on slide 1 after my 2 minutes, you can come and hoik me off the stage. as is my wont. I will try sharing my screen now, folks. So just while I'm doing that, I'm the advisory manager for RSPB Northern Ireland. So I help to deliver the devolved agri-environment scheme in Northern Ireland, known as the Environmental Farming Scheme. And this is a 2-minute run through that scheme. I'm just going to try to present. Can you guys see that okay?
Yes, we can see that. Thanks,
Yep,
Gareth.
that's great.
Excellent. Okay, guys. So very briefly, folks, thanks very much to Jackie for inviting us on tonight. This opening slide shows exactly some of those things that's been the common themes tonight. And at the core of it, absolutely, is farmers, communities, farmer engagement, and really getting farmers to lead on the conservation work themselves. And you can see features like scrapes here, and obviously the hugely dedicated staff, our very own Katie Gibb. I'm sure some of you practitioners will know Katie very well from the Antrim Hills, who's really our Curlew star up in the Antrim Hills, and this is the landscape overlooking the Antrim Hills site. There we are. Okay, not to labour the point. So sorry, my slides are a bit dull compared to some of the other fantastic presentations here. Basically, for the Environmental Farming Scheme, farmers become eligible if they've got breeding waders on their land through being in higher tier areas, which are sort of international and nationally designated sites, SACs, SPAs, as has been mentioned, ASSIs, which is our equivalent of the triple SIs here, or if they've got priority habitats or species, such as breeding wader assemblages, which are recognised and recorded, as it were, by the department, then they can apply for the breeding wader options within the Environmental Farming Scheme. Of course, one of the issues there is that there's large areas outside of those designated sites where farmers aren't in groups or in landscapes with that sort of support, where we're missing that support for waders, and that's obviously something we want to look at in the future more. Farmers who do get accepted into EFS then basically get a site-specific, what they call a site-specific remedial management plan. It's basically just a conservation management plan to try and produce the best outcomes for the features identified on their farms with paid options. This is an example of some of those paid options. A lot of you who work, have, receive agri-environment funding or who help to deliver it will be very familiar with these sorts of options. So they're obviously based on exactly what's being talked about tonight, folks. Grazing management. This is just a very brief summary. There's obviously a lot more detail and very good advice sheets and information leaflets about this information. As well available to farmers, and you can see the area payment for the fields is a reasonable payment, and again it's again a kind of compensatory payment for farmers for having to reduce stock and graze stock in a certain way. Then there's obviously options for scrub control, rush control, creation of scrapes, and predator control, etc. And obviously these are the key tools that the farmers will use. So our experience over delivering the current environmental scheme in Northern Ireland which has been operating since about 2018, is that one of the great designs within the scheme supported by DARA and the ENGOs like ourselves and Ulster Wildlife and others has been this development of group networks of farmers across significant areas and areas with significant assemblages of species, etc. And these, we know from the evidence we've collected that these groups work really well. Farmers really like them because they feel really well supported by having, a consistent advisory input, etc., who can then also liaise with the department over any issues and queries, etc. And also, obviously, then the groups work at a kind of landscape scale. So that connectivity that was being talked about earlier is really critical here, especially for species like curlew. And we see how curlews utilize their landscape from important nesting areas to important chick feeding areas and foraging areas, etc. Also, the DARE, oops, I've just noted the typo. The DARE EFS delivery team are excellent. There's a lot of really good expertise there, very supportive team, and really helpful when we go back, or farmers. We very often liaise on behalf of farmers, but farmers can go directly to them as well and get really good support. Some of those constraints that we found, ourselves and the department, farmers and other deliverers, have found that there isn't really any support for farmers outside of groups. So farmers with these higher plans, whether it's breeding waders, species-rich grasslands, peatlands, woodlands, etc., that they don't really have that support that the groups do, and that's something we would like to address in the future. We find that DARE tend to favour habitat-based options, and generally, for example, species-rich grassland over the breeding wader options. So we find very often breeding waders obviously are associated very often with peatland because they're on the more extensively managed farmland. They're very often based on peatlands, for example, or the more species-rich grasslands. So there's always a bit of a ding-dong with the department over getting the suitable grazing for breeding waders, which obviously then DARE concern may conflict with peatland or species-rich grassland incentives, and generally we find a good management there, but there is always that issue. EFS we find is very prescription heavy. It's kind of prescription based. You must do this at this time of year, and with very little flexibility built in, and including flexibility over climate change and, for example, longer growing seasons of grass and rush and scrub, etc., etc., etc. And it's also perceived by farmers, not always the case, but it is always perceived by farmers as a bit punitive, so that the inspector's department, if you like, within DARE tend not to speak with the EFS delivery department, who don't speak with the mappers. So again, that's something we would like to address, a more coordinated sort of approach within DARE to sort of provide more incentivization and support for farmers. Very nearly there, if I'm taking too much time here, Jackie. So the evidence shows clearly that the groups work much more farmer support through groups, and we would really like to develop and expand those groups in the upcoming scheme, which is due to be rolled out again. Like the schemes in Wales and England, there's been a bit of delay, but that's given us the opportunity to help really design and feed into, and advocate for what we consider good based on our experiences. So we're doing that with the other ENJOs as we speak. So the new scheme we hope will be rolled out in 2026, due to be called the Farming with Nature scheme, and we hope it will take a lot of the lessons learned from EFS. So we definitely need much more uptake and buy-in from farmers. The current scheme, there was a huge drop-off, about 80% we lost of farmers who were in agri-environment from the previous scheme when they rolled out EFS, and that's never really been that's never really been sort of compensated for. So there's still a relatively low amount of farmers for what's quite an administratively sort of costly scheme. Again, more flexible, less prescription based, much more based. We would like to see something like they have in the Republic of Ireland, which is the ACRES scheme. Some of you will be familiar with, which is a much more results based scheme. Obviously still issues there, but we're looking at and learning those lessons. And we find that farmers generally favour those much more. They're much more kind of, well, if you can get to that result, give you a lot more flexibility about how you can work with your advisors on the ground about doing that, so that it's not just so prescription heavy. Payments should be more linked to the actual cost. So it's not really income foregone by the time you include, the costs of the time spent doing it, the cost of the equipment, etc. And as we see with a lot of those capital items like fencing or machinery and all of that, or contractors, that the prices haven't gone up since the original prices given, or the original financial support given back in 2018. So we really think that needs to be linked to inflation to be much more realistic for farmers and to get more uptake. And also we would encourage more additionality. So for example, the Curlew LIFE project working in combination with the environmental farming scheme down in Fermanagh, for example, or up in the Antrim Hills, that's been absolutely crucial. Without that additional landscape scale, predator control, nest fencing, creation of wet features, etc., we don't think EFS would have had anywhere near the same impact. So yes, we would have improved the habitat, but that critical element around productivity and those factors for the birds themselves, we feel that those additional funded projects need to be much more sort of built in and incorporated into the schemes. That's just a very quick example of what the acres scorecard looks like. So farmers can go from a low score, and the higher they score over the time of their engagement with the project, the more they will get paid, as their habitat or their species scores improve. And they can do a lot of this themselves. This is designed essentially to be supported by advisors on the ground and obviously the ecological experts and the hydrologists, etc. But it's something that farmers themselves can do and lead on, and then obviously engage with other farmers in the community and show the way. Okay, I think that's my lot, folks.
Thank you, Gareth.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So staying with alphabetical order then, if we go to Scotland next. So Chris Bailey is going to give us an overview of the situation there. Thank you, Chris.
Hi, Jackie, and hi, everyone. So I don't have any slides, so I'll just sort of talk through for a couple of minutes, sort of building on really what Rhian and Gareth have sort of said in terms of the basics. From a Scotland perspective, there's two things to say. First of all, we still have a current scheme which was built on from sort of 2015 onwards, called the Agri-Environment Climate Scheme. So it's pretty likely that there'll be another round in 2025. We're waiting for confirmation from the Scottish Government to confirm that, but it's very likely that there'll be a round in 25 and 26. So within that scheme, it's a competitive scheme, so the farmers would have to apply, and there's not an absolute chance that they'll get in. And it does depend a bit on budgets of the Scottish Government, so that's a little bit why they're delaying making sort of final decisions about next year. But yeah, so within that scheme, there is a series of options which sort of very similar in lots of respects to what Gareth has sort of outlined, what's available in England. And yeah, it's covering everything from sort of the grassland options through to how you can do work in wetland areas, through to potentially up in sort of the moorland areas, and also there are some options that are linked to peatlands as well. So a sort of range of different options that are available through this scheme. As I say, it's a competitive scheme. Normally the application windows open in about February time and run until May, June, but the timings vary slightly from year to year. So you'd have to keep an eye on Scottish Government website for exact timings. Within that, yeah, within the options that are available, what you would normally be looking to do is to build a sort of package of measures that provide for curlew and for other wader species, because Scotland, because it's got a range of different waders and quite a lot of them, it's still open as a scheme for wader conservation across Scotland. So you sort of have to marry up the options dependent on what species you're particularly focusing in on. But yeah, there should be sort of a range of different things. Predator control is available in and around designated sites, but it's not a widely available option. So you would have to sort of, well, you'd have to be speaking to Nature Scot, who are the sort of authorising body up here, and you'd have to probably get some advice from people as to whether that option would be available. And then behind everything else, there is a series of advisory support. So there's on-ground advisory support from organisations like RSPB. We can't work everywhere. We are focused in particular areas, and I've got a team of advisors who provide, similar type of advice to what Rhian was providing down in sort of Hadrian's Wall area, but yeah, in various places across Scotland. But outside that, we're working in partnership with other organisations to provide equivalent advice. So hopefully you'll be getting very similar advice, irrespective of whether it's coming from RSPB or not. So as I say, there's a range of different options. Gareth's highlighted some of the challenges within the current schemes. Looking forward, so I think we've what's likely to be happening from a Scotland perspective is that we will be carrying on with the current arrangements for the next couple of years in terms of our higher tier schemes. And the hope is that from 2027 onwards, there will be a replacement for that. And Scottish Government are working on, or beginning to work on, what that looks like now. Undoubtedly, it will build on what's already in existence, but hopefully make some of the improvements and try to make it a more flexible and more useful scheme for the farmers and crofters. So yeah, I think that's the sort of basics. I have done a handout, but I'm not managing to be able to connect it, Jackie. So can I ask that you sort of circulate that if you're sending out a sort of follow-up email within the handout? It's only a side of A4. It sort of highlights all the various options that are available from a Curlew perspective, and with links through to the relevant bits of the government website, so that you can, if people are in Scotland and working in Scotland, you can actually go away and have a look at the options as they currently stand. Okay.
Thank you, Chris. That's great. I will do that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And next it's Wales then, and Rhian Pierce, who works at our Curlew Life site in Ysbyddiaban and Rheithog, is going to give us an overview of the situation there with the agri-environment schemes. Thanks, Rhian.
Oh, thank you. I will pop myself so everyone can see me and the lovely Curlew picture. So I'm Rhian. I'm a conservation advisor in North Wales. And in terms of agri-environment policy, we work closely with the policy team in Wales. So unfortunately, we are in an annoying interim period where our historic Glasstir agri-environment scheme finished almost 2 years ago. And there is a very temporary scheme in place, which does very little. And there is an ongoing consultation now about what will be available in the future. So a couple of things have changed. It was announced at the Royal Welsh Show the Winter Fair last week that there was an obligation for every farmer to plant 10% trees on their farm, which, although sounds fantastic in general, from a Curlew point of view, this is actually very concerning, because obviously the farmers would choose their less productive pieces of land to plant the 10% trees in, which 9 times out of 10 would be either where the Curlew are nesting or nearby. There were Curlew layers, and Welsh Government were making noises that they would have some exclusion zones, but they didn't fill us with confidence. So we were glad to see the 10% tree requirement removed from the future scheme. So they are insisting on 10% habitat. Every farm must have 10% habitat. And if you don't have it in the form of semi-improved or unimproved habitat types, you can create a habitat on improved land, which obviously isn't ideal, but arguably better than not. There have been a couple of concerning changes, I would say, in terms of the woodland stuff. So this is nothing to do with Curlew, but you no longer have to leave all the dead wood, and the feeding of game birds within your woodland is still allowed, despite being in the future agri-environment scheme. So in the future, there'll be 3 layers, an optional, the universal layer, which everyone can apply for, and the scheme should be suitable for everyone, or no, achievable for everyone, although that is debatable. You then have an extra layer where you can opt to do extra things. And then there's a collaborative layer, which is to encourage farmers to work as a group. So as we know, if I do a little bit of work on my farm and then 20 miles away, someone does a little bit on their farm, it's not joined up, whereas there'd be more funding for me to work with 7 of my neighbours, for example. So that's really great to see. So what's great, which was left out initially in the universal layer, is that funding for triple SIs wasn't included. That was only for the next layer up, which left a lot of our farmers who have Curlew on triple SIs with existing management agreements and payments very concerned. We were also very concerned. We were like, can we fill this gap? Obviously, as the farmer, they have a legal obligation to not damage the triple SI, but it is the payment in the management agreements that probably ensures that no damage does happen. Commons have also been included this time. Initially, that was only to be in the collaborative layer, which obviously makes sense because it is usually a grazing association of a group of people, group of farmers. But actually, there are so many commons with fenced off parcels on them that can be managed by individuals. So it's great to see that they are now going to be in the universal layer. I'm going to share my screen just as an example. So the main concern is the lack of money going into it. So I'll show you something we've done with hay meadows in the Hiraethog Curlew Life area, and it's blooming expensive. If you want a farmer to put aside land for hay meadows, you've got to pay him a lot. So let's see if I can find the yeah. Can you see that? Someone put a thumb up. Yeah, there's a couple of nods.
Yes,
cool. So
yes,
historically in the Glastier, there were 2 options for Curlew, and there they are. And out of all of the farmers, and we must work with 80 farmers, I only found 1 who actually opted for the Curlew option, and he put this on 3 fields. However, 2 of those fields were not in a very good place, so you could argue that it was a waste of everybody's time and taxpayers' money to put those 2 fields into a Curlew option because they were nowhere near where the Curlew would be. So anyway, out of lots of farmers with Curlew, 1 chose to follow. So these are just some payment rates. So what we then thought, well, let's have a look at some hay meadow payment rates, because there was obviously a reason no one was going for the Curlew options, and it was because they were only being paid £90 a hectare. Whereas with the hay meadow options, you can see they're more generous. We went for the acid grass, and most of them are semi-improved or unimproved acid grasslands. So we went for about £250 per hectare, and that was for 3 months. You might have to read this. There's a lot of notes.
Apologies, Rhian, just to give you a 1-minute warning, just because we're running quite over. Thank you. Cool. Sorry.
It's all right. In a nutshell, we wanted them to close the hayfield off from April the 1st until at least middle of July. And we came up with a payment rate of £500 per hectare for that. And this was taking into account things like removing their field that was useful during lambing time, accounting for extra forage they might have to buy in because you've taken a field off them in April. And this is based on the Glastier, but multiplied up and added a bit. Basically, that's a lot of money to pay farmers for a hay meadow, but it would be the only way, and this would only be sufficient if they were beef and sheep farmers. We approached one dairy farmer who almost laughed, but said he'd do it out of the goodness of his heart. So, yep, that is where we are with Payment rates and grants in Wales very much up in the air and in limbo until stuff is announced in the summer.
Thank you, Rhian. Thank you. So I'm just going to briefly play you the little video from our colleague on the England side of things. See if you can see that. Hopefully you can see my screen. It's quite short. Can I just check? Can you all see the recording?
We can see it, Jackie, but we can't hear it. Or
Okay.
I can't hear it.
Let's try that again. Okay. So this is Philip Miller from the Forest of Bowland area in Northern England.
I still can't hear it, Jackie. I don't know if anybody else can.
No. Probably worth pointing out that Philip's a farmer as well as working for the RSPB, so he has a good overview, doesn't he? Just while we're sorting that out.
I'll try it again. I'm not sure why. I can hear it on my side, and it's set to share audio on the share. I'll just try it one more time, and if not, so it's definitely including sound.
Are underway, and a third is expected to be launched sometime in 2025.
Can you hear it now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll go back and off we go again. Third time lucky.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to an agri-environment update for England. Under the new structure of ELMS, there will be 3 schemes. The first is landscape recovery. 2 rounds of successful pilots are underway, and a third is expected to be launched sometime in 2025. These projects require a minimum of 500 hectares between joint landowners or farmers. These projects need to have a common theme or aim running through the project, such as water quality, habitat restoration or species recovery. The aim of landscape recovery is, as well as financial contributions from DEFRA, private finance is secured to increase the amount of delivery. This will also provide the opportunity to deliver bespoke options that are not funded through the SFI higher tier options. If the pilot phase is successful and funding is secured, the scheme will last 20 years, providing secure payments. The next scheme is Countryside Stewardship Higher Tier. Applications are currently closed, and we are led to believe a slow launch will begin in 2025. However, getting through the backlog of HLS rollover agreements will take many years. Those not currently in schemes will be prioritised over those in rollovers. Higher tiers allow for ambitious habitat creation, restoration or maintenance. Examples will be wood pasture, wet grassland or species-rich grassland. New options are becoming available for river restoration or allowing fields to flood under floodplain options. However, some of these options will also be available in SFI as endorsed options, removing the need to apply to higher tier but requiring Natural England approval. These schemes last 10 years but are ultimately going to be more difficult to access for the foreseeable future. The final scheme is Sustainable Farming Incentive. Launched in 2022, many new options have been launched to try and fund more sustainable farming practices. More recently, the mid-tier now being closed, those options are slowly being integrated into the option suite of SFI. Frustratingly, the launch of this scheme has been slow, making it difficult to decide whether to go with the options available and start receiving payments, or wait to see what else comes. Originally, RPA had said further options will be able to be added into existing agreements on annual renewal dates. However, this was not to be, as it became apparent RPA computer systems could not cope with adding new options into existing agreements. This has resulted in some farmers and landowners having multiple agreements as they continue to take out the new agreement each time more options are released. One of the big benefits of SFI is that the payments are split into quarterly instalments instead of one payment, helping with cash flow. The final scheme, the Capital Grant Scheme, is now currently closed. However, going forwards, capital works will be devolved from maintenance payment schemes, such as aforementioned. The The capital grant scheme is split into 3 options: boundaries grants, water quality grants and air quality grants. Boundaries grants cover hedge laying, coppicing, planting and associated fencing, also wall restoration, top wiring and hedge tree planting which may be needed for SFI options. Water and air quality grants require catchment sensitive officer sign off, which is becoming increasingly difficult to get, meaning contacting your local officer at the earliest opportunity is very important. It's hoped this scheme will reopen next year, but due to high take-up this year, funding has become reduced, so has been paused currently. I hope you find this useful. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you so much for coming, and it's great to have your support to be here with us. And we have the link to the film there in the chat. Please do share it with any other people who are either farming or landowners who you think might be looking for some advice on how to help Curlew. So thank you again to all our speakers, and Kit Acton for taking part as well. Thank you, Kit. And I will just wish you a good rest of evening. Thank you very much for coming.